Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Poultry Feed Additive Summit by Wisnetic, an event specially designed for poultry nutritionists where we discuss the latest in industry updates brought to you directly from some of the world's top feed additive suppliers. Our goal here is to provide you with everything you need to know to stay up to date with the latest research in the field without having to leave your home or office. And we believe and hope this event will help prepare you for market challenges in your own production systems. I'm Sam Rochel, an associate professor of poultry nutrition at Auburn University, and on behalf of the Wisnetics team, I would like to thank everyone who joined us today. This will certainly be an afternoon full of knowledge and valuable experience, and we are very happy to have you with us. I'm speaking from Auburn University, representing the Southeast U.S., but I'm sure we have people from all over the country joining us, so feel free to share where you are, share that in the chat. We'd love to know where you're coming from. I'd also like to thank our sponsors who made this event possible: Additive, Cargill, and DSM-Firmenich. And last but not least, a special thanks to our speakers who will bring their best to the event. I'm sure going to add a lot to everyone. So feel free to use the YouTube chat if you need help or have any questions. Everything will be answered there at the end of each presentation. And so without further ado, let's get started. And I'd like to introduce our first guest of the day, Dr. Elizabeth Bobeck from Iowa State University, who will deliver a presentation titled Probiotics, Functionality, and Mode of Action. Dr. Bobeck, welcome, and it is a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to talk to the group today about probiotics. And a lot of my talk is actually going to be focused around maybe how to pick a probiotic that might work in your specific setting. So I'm not necessarily going to mention any specific products or trade names, but we basically can give you a good decision tree so you can understand maybe what might work in your setting. So what are probiotics? The World Health Organization has put out a definition that they're live microorganisms when administered in adequate amounts confer a health benefit to the host. So I know that working in the industry, we have a lot of different terms and potential products that are kind of under this big category. There are some major types of probiotics that we typically use, and we'll go through those. But I really want you to think about probiotics in such a way that it's not really a catch-all category, that probiotics really are specialty products, that choosing one is activity and complex specific. So you have an activity in mind or a problem you need to solve, you really need to search out a probiotic product that can do that for you. And you might even find that specific poultry complexes might need different probiotics than some other ones. So some of the common definitions for these industry products, we actually have products that might be individual, or it can be a combination of different items. So when we think about probiotics, we're usually thinking about bacteria or yeast. Those are the ones that confer some sort of health benefit, and adequate amount is definitely the key term there, because the adequate amount might be different based on the probiotic and also based on the setting. We've also got prebiotics. Those are substrates that can be utilized by microorganisms. Often these are different types of fibers, but basically we're finding a way to feed host microorganisms. Then we've got synbiotics, which are a combination of both pro and prebiotics. Those are very popular in different products that are out there for poultry today. And then we've got postbiotics, which are products that the microorganisms actually make. So it could be non-viable cells, it could be specific bacteriocins or other compounds, but basically a compound that would help confer a host benefit. So when we are thinking about prebiotics, we're gonna not speak so much about that today. We're kind of gonna stay in the probiotics category, but just know that a specific product you're looking at might actually be a synbiotic, a prebiotic, or a postbiotic. It could also have those components. So just to kind of give you a visual on this, because I'm definitely a visual learner, it helps me understand things a little bit better. The prebiotic, again, specialized fiber. The probiotic, what we'll be mostly talking about today, is the live microorganism. And then the post is something that's made by the bacteria. So the prime concern for the reason for using probiotics is this post-antibiotic growth promoting era. We are really trying to modulate or improve the intestinal environment because of concern of enteric disease that used to be treated by antibiotics. But when we think or we talk about probiotics, they're not replacements for antibiotics. The functionality is not the same, and I think sometimes the language can cross over, and we almost have an expectation that a probiotic is going to be equal to an antibiotic. But just remember their functionality is, and the reason for using them is not the same. So don't kind of keep those separate in your mind as we're evaluating probiotics, because they do not have the exact same mechanism or functionality as antibiotics. So when we think about the most commonly used probiotics, there's strains of Bacillus subtilis, Lactobacillus, Bifidobacterium, and Streptococcus. We can have products that contain single, multi, or proprietary strains within these species, and certainly there are other species outside of these. But one of the interesting things about feeding a probiotic product is that you may not know exactly what species are in there, because there could be a probiotic with a proprietary component. So just something to always think about when you're evaluating these different probiotic components. We do have different delivery methods based on the particular need, all the way from in ovo, so prior to hatch, and then in feed or in water versions. Some of these probiotics do have different versions, and some are just only come in one. So just kind of think about the best application method for your particular setting. So when we think about evaluating a probiotic, what does this probiotic need to do in your particular poultry house? So there's a huge component of farm management, which includes stress, welfare, health interventions, feed and litter management, and nutrition. These all, interact with the litter microbiota and also influence the gut microbiota of the host, or the chicken or the turkey that we would be talking about. So when we kind of think more holistically, a probiotic is not going to be a catch-all and solve any problem that is in these categories. So we have to think of it as complementary to having good management in all of these other ways, including the environment. So when we think about how probiotics can work in a particular setting, just remember that feed and litter and health interventions, including stress, welfare, and stocking density, are things that are not going to be solved by just putting a Band-Aid or a probiotic into the setting. So we really are looking at this holistically as to whether or not a probiotic is going to help in your particular case. So there was some really neat work done within the last few years from Dr. Tori Luft. He's over at the USDA here, actually in Ames, Iowa, and he's done some work that's characterizing the chicken gastrointestinal tract and the major players that are colonizers in those different areas. So I think a really interesting component of how probiotics can work specifically in a setting is if a probiotic contains a bacterium that's already existing in the tract, where is it in that tract and what mechanism do we expect it to work through? So I really love these pictures that show or highlight the different places where these specific bacteria colonize, because then we can look in that specific area and expect to have it in effect. But just know that if there's a place where we are feeding a probiotic that the bacteria doesn't normally colonize, it's going to be harder for that probiotic to have an effect in that certain location. So you'll notice that Lactobacillus, Bifido, Enterococcus, Clostridium are just some normal parts of the digestive tract already. So think about the tract, the location, and the impact you're expecting to have, and that will help you pick a probiotic that could work for you. So some of the things that we have to think about is, beyond the microenvironment, what are the major things happening in the different regions of the gut? This paper did a great job delineating the different parts of the poultry gastrointestinal tract, their function, and the microbiota that work there. So the picture I showed you on the page before has kind of the major players, and here we're just looking at what are the functions that those bacteria support. You'll notice that the cecum is the most diverse of all of the locations, and depending on the different region of the tract, the bacteria that flourish there are definitely going to change, because we've got different substrates, different exposure to oxygen, and some different stressors that are put on those bacteria. So one of the most important things that I like to think about when evaluating probiotic is that age plays a huge role in microbial membership and diversity. I'm talking to you as a nutritionist and an immunologist, so just know that I'm not a microbiologist, but as a nutritionist, I have to learn how to use and evaluate these when we do trials. So I lean heavily on my microbiologist partners for some of the more ins and outs of the specific activities that some of these different phyla can confer. But as a nutritionist, we really have to know how to use and interpret data, because we are the ones being asked to put those into different diets and also being asked about feeding rates. So one of the most cool or interesting things over time is that if we look at from different phyla or family, different genre of bacteria, there are large changes that happen between 7 and 35 days old. So as a chick is put into an environment exposed to feed, the microbial environment, we see large changes. And one of those changes is there's a huge shift to lactobacilli. So we see fewer of those at the beginning, and that it becomes the dominant phyla at the end. In early on, we see that Clostridium is a dominant family in chicks, and that becomes one of the smaller ones as the birds age. So one of the important parts about poultry nutrition is that we're able to be really precise with different components of their diet, from an energy or protein. Maybe we need to start thinking about phase feeding different probiotics for a specific purpose, and we'll talk about that here in a second. So these are, it's a very large table, and I do not expect you to read all these beneficial probiotic species, but I just want you to get an idea or a feel for how many different species are actually used in poultry production. So there's quite a few, especially within those different families, but just know that a lactobacillus is not a lactobacillus, okay? There are different groups within species within those families. So you could be feeding a lactobacillus and it might have a different effect than another product because it's actually a different species. So how do probiotics work? Well, it really depends on the probiotic. There is not a one size fits all. There is not a probiotic that can work in every setting, because each of those probiotics has a specific effect. There are many different excellent papers that detail specific probiotics in case you're interested in a specific product that has a mechanism of action. A lot of that is published. So if there's one that you would like to know about, I would encourage you to look up that specific research paper in some of our peer-reviewed articles, just because there's really great detail for each of these probiotics there. But when we think about what are the potential activities a probiotic can have, so what are the possibilities for helping in a particular production setting or a complex, we have probiotics that manufacture small molecules that have systemic effects, so you can think about some of those postbiotics. We have bacteria that produce enzymes, those that mediate interaction because they alter something on the cell surface. Immune system modulation, producing organic acids as food for themselves and other beneficial bacteria. Some that interact directly with gut microbiota, some that help colonization resistance, so they make it harder for bad bacteria to attach to the gut, and those that improve barrier function or even antibody production. So barrier function in changing tight junctions and also increasing mucin production. So there's a variety of effects that probiotics can have. So just the goal here is to understand a probiotic is not one size fits all. So there are some really nice review papers that show some of the effects of different categories or types of probiotics. So just to kind of give you a visual on how some of this works, there are different bacteria that can produce antimicrobial substances that can reduce biofilms. So certain biofilm producing bacteria that can, for example, colonize different areas and cause issues in the bird's digestive tract. We have those that actually increase the mucus layer, those that improve tight junctions, and those that might even produce nutrients that are beneficial to the host. We also have probiotics that help in certain settings, such as heat stress. So if you kind of think of the lifespan of a bird, there are specific times or times of the year where heat stress might be a bigger deal. So a probiotic that might help growth performance could be different than one that might actually help a specific challenge like heat stress. There are probiotic categories that are able to help reduce the oxidative stress and the heat shock response in the intestinal epithelium. We've often found that a more complex type of probiotic might help better in this case, just because there's several species within there that might have effects that help different aspects of the effects of heat stress that the bird is feeling. And we also know that we're not talking about just the microenvironment for the bacteria. We've got this complex interplay with the host immune system. So how are probiotics going to help the immune system of the host? Well, if we just kind of back up and think, the immune system is there to protect the host against pathogen infection. Okay, well, we want to make sure that any probiotic we're feeding is going to be able to support that response. The host immune system is clearing damaged tissues. It's also surveilling for malignant cells, and it's also responsible for appropriate tolerance. So feeding some of these probiotics that can help the immune system early on would be really smart, because it helps teach or guide the immune system to understand which bacteria are going to be beneficial, and also work on exclusion of bacteria that are going to cause issues to the bird later on. So some of the immunomodulatory actions of probiotics have been really well defined. We and others have shown some direct interaction with immune cells to change antibody production, to change the activity of the innate immune system, and also interact with some of the immune cells that are directly in the lamina propria layer of the gut mucosa. So I think that is pretty awesome, by using a feed-through technology, that we can interact with the host immune system. We also have seen different probiotics that can help reduce pro-inflammatory cytokines. So you could imagine that a probiotic that is inflammatory could be needed in a different setting versus one that we might want some more anti-inflammatory effects. These probiotics, again, are strain dependent. So the strains that produce these effects are not all going to be the same, okay? So for example, there are some specific lactobacilli that have been shown to increase intestinal antibody or IgA secretion. But that particular lactobacillus is not going to be the same as those that maybe alter or help growth, or some other growth-related problems that might occur in poultry. It's often the case that for the immunomodulatory actions, we have to feed these probiotics for a longer period of time. I would say the most common feeding strategy is to feed these probiotics, over the lifespan of the bird. But just know that to see immune effects, we're going to have to feed them basically over a period of time. It's not just going to be put it in one diet and then done. So there are some really, really neat examples in the literature where some specific probiotic products have actually been able to reduce necrotic enteritis and some other diseases of poultry, and I think that's pretty awesome. So the paper here is a compilation of some different probiotics that have been shown to have this activity. And I think one of the neatest things is that we're looking across species and genres. So it's not just that only lactobacillus or only bacillus have these properties. There's definitely members, different species within those groups that can have an impact. So that's why I say it's kind of important to know what's in your probiotic. You'll get a better idea of what it can do if you look up some of the research that's been done on that specific probiotic. We've also seen that in some specific pathogens, such as the human foodborne pathogens, we've had a good impact of reducing Campylobacter. So that is coming more from a human food safety standpoint. And most of these species that are working to reduce Campylobacter are helping to produce butyrate. They're producing some bacteriocin, so they're actually having antibacterial activity against the Campylobacter. So they're actually altering the nutrient microenvironment that makes it harder for Campy to survive. So I think, again, that's really awesome, and there's some really good data from some different groups that show specifically how these different probiotics work. So overall, just when selecting or thinking about a complex that might need or use a probiotic, probiotics right now are very, very common. There are a lot of great reasons to use them, but the ways that you can analyze whether or not a probiotic is working, you want to know, are you looking for a general growth? Are you looking for support during potential events such as heat stress? Are you looking for reduction of bacteria that might be a human foodborne pathogen issue? Are you looking for immune support? And you could think immune support in a young group of birds is much different than a breeder population. So many of these same probiotics can have different or positive effects in these different populations. But if you get nothing else from the day, just know that these bacteria are really specific in their activities, and often combining them in a more complex way, such as several different bacteria in the same product, or supplying a prebiotic along with that probiotic, or in the symbiotic case, or supplying postbiotics, has even a more synergistic effect. So even though we can kind of look across the bird's digestive tract and see that lactobacillus is predominant, we can feed different species of lactobacillus that still have an effect. And the age of the bird matters, and the particular problems with the complex matter. So I understand that can be a little frustrating because there's not one answer. It's this probiotic is great in this setting, but it may not work in that setting. So doing a little bit of digging and understanding kind of the basic problems and the processes and the potential aid that a probiotic can give you is really important. But it's going to take some time, some knowledge, and having a relationship over time with a specific complex to get some good answers to the problems that a probiotic could solve. So I really thank you for listening to this kind of general talk about probiotics, but hopefully it just gives you a better idea that there are definitely options and opportunities, and something that might work for your complex might not work for someone else. And it does not mean that the product doesn't work. It just means that in your setting, something else might be appropriate.
Great presentation, Liz. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We do have a couple of questions. One I think is very appropriate from you, given your location. But
Sure.
in turkeys, is the same microbiota development similar in turkeys? Can we draw conclusions from the broiler literature and apply that to turkeys? Or are there a lot of differences in the microbiota between those two classes of poultry?
Oh, there are definitely differences. There's a couple of good papers. I think Tori Luft is again one of the authors on the papers, but they're comparing the species and the families between chickens or broilers specifically, and turkeys, and they're definitely not the same. So you could imagine that a probiotic isn't going to work the same across those species. So excellent question. And then the longer lived component also means that they may develop in different time frames, since we have more time with those turkeys.
Yeah, makes sense. Another question I had, you mentioned for like immunomodulatory effects, it's generally better to feed the probiotic for a longer period of time. But on the other hand, you mentioned being able to apply probiotics for specific situations. I mean, is the entire microbiome, pliable enough to be able to target at specific phases for different challenges, do you think?
I think that we're kind of at a turning point right now in nutrition, because we're trying to be so specific and precise with our feeding. And one of the things that we aren't always specific with is some of the additives that go in. We just kind of forget. I mean, the probiotics there, it costs you money, but it stays in the diet at the same rate over time. So I think one of the things that maybe we need to start thinking about or changing is there might be probiotic products that are better for birds younger, and those that might be better supportive of growth later on. And one of the really neat things about long-term probiotic supplementation is improved antibody titers. So you could imagine in a breeder population, that could be great, right? We could be vaccinating and getting improved titers in these adults. It might not be as useful for some of our younger, our broilers, for example, just because it takes about 2 to 3 weeks to get maximal titer against a vaccination, and some of those birds are ready to market by that time. So the longer term feeding always is recommended, but I understand definitely might not be feasible, especially with these diets that are switching. But I think for nutritionists and working with feed mills, if it's possible, there might be a better combination to use based on age of the bird. But it's going to take a long time to convince some of those mills, because they're busy beyond belief that they might have to carry 1 or 2 probiotics products.
Right. That makes sense. And you talked about, the interaction with necrotic enteritis, and particularly how certain probiotic species can potentially compete or act against Clostridia. What about Eimeria, just Coccidia, or other enteric pathogens? I mean, are there a lot of interactions there with different probiotics or maybe particular strains or species?
So we've seen, at least in some of the work that we've done and also some of the challenge work that are looking specifically at Eimeria, some of the probiotics that just support general growth or general, let's just say, like increasing the mucin layer and some other things that might help competitively exclude Eimeria, those have definitely been beneficial, but they're even more beneficial, I would say, in preventing necrotic enteritis because of changing microenvironments that allow Clostridium to thrive. So sometimes I think it's really hard to know against a parasite, which is in a completely different category than some of the things that maybe a probiotic could help. But if we're able to support the gut itself, just from a physiology standpoint, make the gut a little more resistant, maybe by increasing villus length, just to improve feed intake or help support some of the normal physiological processes, while the bird is also under a little bit of stress. I think those could be some beneficial actions, but hard to parse out because you don't know then if that bird would have continued down to getting necrotic enteritis.
Right.
So I think those models are really important to follow, where you have groups that are going to develop necrotic enteritis and those that are not, just to understand the limitations of the different products that you test.
Yeah, makes sense. No, thank you. It's a difficult thing to work out, I know. You talked about symbiotics, and do you have ideas about where to maybe lean more on symbiotics, or even provide some type of prebiotic for a specific probiotic separately? Is that another application?
So I kind of get the feeling, and this is without doing a commercial trial, but some of the most important parts of those prebiotics are developing tolerance in the bird, and also that fiber physically being in the space. I mean, there's like a physical aspect, even just, it sounds weird, but it's like brushing by, changing the brush border, getting the gut specifically set up, where I think early on those could be really impactful, like in the first couple of weeks of life.
Right.
So you're supporting with a probiotic, but you're also taking a fiber that can also produce or help other beneficial bacteria such as butyrate producers. So I think early on those really could change the landscape of what's going to happen in a flock over time. You wait till the end, it's kind of like, well, we kind of miss the developmental time for that intestine that happens in the first week post-hatch. So I think it's really cool technologies, especially some of the in ovo probiotics that different companies are developing because they've specifically isolated a bacteria that's shown to have benefits. So really cool work overall. It's just, it can be hard for someone who wants to apply it to parse out in their operation what's going to work.
Yeah. Very good. Well, thanks again. This is great information. A lot of good questions from the audience. So I know it's a topic of importance. And as you mentioned, they're very popular. So people are using probiotics. And so there's a lot of people want to know how to use them better or more efficiently. So thanks again for your presentation.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Okay, we'll proceed to our next presentation. Shelby Corey from DSM from Anish will talk about looking to improve opportunities to improve breast meat yield. 25-hydroxy D3 may be an answer. Shelby, welcome and great to have you.
Thanks, Sam. And thanks, everybody. Glad to be here. Today, I'm going to talk about 25-hydroxy D3 and the importance of it, and then the effect that it has on muscle development in broilers. So first, we'll kind of go over the structure of vitamin D, the chemical structure, and some of the metabolite forms so we can understand a bit better as we go forward. So vitamin D, a fat-soluble vitamin, and we know vitamin D2, naturally occurring in fungi and yeast, is less potent than D3. Only about 10% is absorbed compared to D3 in birds. That vitamin D3 that we talk about, that's in the diets, naturally occurring in humans and animals. We get it from diet, the sun. It's a precursor to that storage form, which is the 25-hydroxy D3. And then the biologically active form is the 1,25 dihydroxy. And today we're going to focus on the metabolite, specifically on 25-hydroxy D3, which is that circulating form. And you can see its chemical structure here. It has the hydroxy on the 25 marker. So what are some of the functions, or how does it get to the bird and to the different tissues? So through the diet, through supplementation of vitamin D3, it goes through the intestine to be absorbed. And then it is transported into the liver to be hydroxylated. And that's when we get our 25-hydroxy D3. That step is then through the kidneys. And in the kidneys, it's hydroxylated again to become that 125, or that active hormonal form that we talk about. And then from there, it'll go to the target tissues. And that could be anywhere from intestines, bone, muscle, the immune system, and of course the kidney. And when we're looking at the kidney, and when we have got the 25-hydroxy-D3 present in that tissue, this is really that endocrine pathway, and where we see the calcium phosphorus homeostasis and that bone metabolism that we so often think about when we think about vitamin D3. And then in the other target tissues where we see that 25-hydroxy-D3 be active, we have our vitamin D receptors in the intestine, the bone, the muscle, all of these listed below here as the target tissues. And that's another location where those 25-hydroxy-D3 metabolites are finding their way and having an effect. And so to look at it a little bit differently, we think about birds being raised inside, and we think about vitamin D3 typically coming from the sun, but that's not the case for our livestock raised inside. And so again, there's a very low conversion rate for birds, and being raised indoors, they're not getting it through there. So we know we have to supply it through the diet. When vitamin D3 is supplied through the diet, it goes through the gut and is absorbed into the gut. And from there, it can go into the liver. That gut absorption, though, is dependent upon lipase and bile acids. And in those young birds, or if a bird has an enteric disorder, the absorption could be limited in this step. Again, there it goes to the liver to be hydroxylated into 25-hydroxy-D3. And this is done by 25-hydroxylase enzyme, which is nonspecific, and it's a non-regulated enzyme. And this is where we get that circulating form of 25-hydroxy-D3 that we test for when we pull blood. From there, it's moved and hydroxylated again into the kidney. And this is when we get that 125, which is the active form. This production process is very carefully regulated. So some of the limitations of feeding a dietary vitamin D3 are if there are any gut challenges in those birds, it can compromise the absorption of D3. And early on, lipase and 25-hydroxylase enzymes are not sufficient in those young birds. Any liver challenge that they may be going through could also compromise the hydroxylation of D3 into 25-hydroxy. So ultimately, this is going to lead to lower circulating levels of this active form if we're only feeding vitamin D3 and not feeding a supplemental 25-hydroxy. So why 25-hydroxy? And like I just sort of touched on and explained, 25-hydroxy-D3 is going to give you more faster, efficient absorption compared to feeding a vitamin D3 alone. There's increased water solubility due to it already being hydroxylated and in that 25-OH-D3 form. We can skip that conversion step in the liver. So if there's any sort of enteric challenges like enteritis, malabsorption, any effect like that, we can bypass those issues, and you're still going to get the 25-hydroxy-D3 into the serum like you need it to be. It can be absorbed in the gut, straight to the kidney, and then to the other target tissues. So you know you're going to get those levels that the bird requires. Absorption is less affected by gut status. So if there's enzymatic insufficiencies, fat metabolism, enteric challenges, and then you're going to make sure you get those higher serum levels. Actually, increasing your D3 can down-regulate that hydroxylase enzyme, and so you're not going to get that 25-hydroxy that you need. So increasing D3 is not necessarily going to get you the serum levels that you need. And so we think about the physiology, and I've mentioned that early on birds have insufficient levels of some of these enzymes to be able to help that D3 be absorbed. What's been shown is that trypsin, amylase, and lipase all are pretty low here from day 0 until about day 12 to 14. We can see that here in all 3 of these graphs with lipase and bile acid as well. It isn't until a little closer to day 14 to 21 is when it really starts to bump up production of those enzymes to be able to help with absorption. So early on, those first couple of weeks, lower enzyme production, lower absorption of those fat-soluble vitamins. And so when you have lower absorption, you're going to have lower conversion of D3 to the 25-hydroxy-D3, and therefore lower circulating levels in your plasma. And we can see that here in this graph when we're looking at plasma of 25-hydroxy. It stays pretty low, even dips down a bit day 10. And then you can see around day 14, it really starts to increase as those enzymes increase and D3 can be absorbed more efficiently in the gut. So those other physiological factors that could play a role in how vitamin D3 is absorbed and transferred into 25-hydroxy is any sort of metabolic issues that may be going on, maybe in older birds. If we're talking layers here, if we're talking breeders with fatty liver, stress from heat or management can impact vitamin D. Liver damage, whether toxic or bacterial, can also affect the absorption and digestion of fat-soluble vitamins. And so when we're looking at 25-hydroxy-D3 being fed directly into the diet versus vitamin D3, we can kind of graph out and see what we've seen in many research studies and has been well determined. And if you look at the red line here, we can see vitamin D3, even as you increase those D3 levels, so we're increasing them here, we're not getting an increased level in the blood. Same as for the graph on the right, as we increase that vitamin D3, we're not seeing any sort of increase in the intestine either. When we look at 25-hydroxy-D3 being fed in the diet, we can see that gradual linear increase as we increase the 25-hydroxy-D3 that's fed. So that has a direct impact on the plasma and on the intestine as well. And so at the bottom, now we're looking at our 25-hydroxy-D3 is that orange bar here, and that double D. So this is looking at vitamin D3. If we just doubled it, this is around 5,000 IUs. We get a slight increase compared to that lower level of vitamin D3 at about 2,700 IUs, but still you're not getting to that 25-hydroxy level just simply because D3 is not going to equate to the same as feeding 25-hydroxy directly in the diet. The graph on the right here is showing the similar thing. And what we wanted to show with this trial is that 25-hydroxy has a half-life of around 15 days. And so it's one of those things you have to keep in your diets to keep those serum levels high up there. So in that light green bar, you can see our 25-hydroxy that was fed until 42 days of age. The plasma levels stay well above that of vitamin D or after removal of 25-hydroxy. So again, just showing the importance and showing kind of that half-life, but additional supply of vitamin D3 does not necessarily generate the same results as supplying 25-hydroxy-D3 to the diet. And we can see the difference in those levels. And again, that half-life of about 14 days. So once removed, 25-hydroxy starts to decrease in the plasma. So what does that mean? What are the main functions of 25-hydroxy? Why is it so important? What are the biological actions it can have on the bird? And we generally think about mineral homeostasis and bone metabolism, but there are also several other important biological actions that 25-hydroxy has on the bird, and that includes immune function, fertility, and then today we're going to focus next on skeletal muscle development and growth. And so how is the muscle growing? We know that the number of muscle fibers that a chick has or a broiler has are defined at hatch. It's the same in humans at birth, in all species. As you are hatched or born, the muscle fibers that you have, that is all you're going to have. After hatch, however, the muscle size can grow. So when we talk about muscle growth, we're talking about growing in size, not in number. And there's satellite cells located around these muscle fibers. And this is what enables that muscle to grow in size. So we see here what that kind of looks like. So when 25-hydroxy-D3 is added into the diet in either the breeder or the broiler diet, both have been proven, we can see an increase in satellite cells, an increase in myonucleus, more myogenic factors, and then therefore all of which are increasing the protein synthesis and leading to more meat. And so what do we know specifically about the role 25-hydroxy plays and what are the mechanisms behind this? And so in broilers, we see that effect on satellite cells and protein synthesis. It's been demonstrated that 25-hydroxy-D3 can improve the production of the vitamin D receptors, which are really important. And I mentioned before, those are in all of those target tissues, including muscles. Myogenic regulator factors are also improved or increased, such as MyoD. We've seen increases in the number and activity of satellite cells. So again, right there present on the muscle fiber that are important for muscle growth. Therefore, we've seen an increase in protein synthesis and breast meat content. And so 25-hydroxy is really stimulating that muscle development through those satellite cells to enhance that protein synthesis and therefore generate more muscle instead of depositing lipid, and we're getting more meat. And so we can look specifically at some of these trials to see what were the numbers and what does 25-hydroxy do. So 25-hydroxy-D3 was shown to significantly improve the myogenic factors. So we see Myo5, Pac7, and MyoD all are involved in muscle differentiation, transcription of the satellite cells, and regeneration of tissue. And we can see that when 25-hydroxy was added here in the green bar, significantly increased from our control level of D, or even a higher level of D here, which was shown in the OVN. Looking now at the vitamin D receptor, again, important to have the activation of vitamin D receptors, because without that, you're not going to have the action of 25-hydroxy-D3. And we could see that feeding that actually improves the activation of those receptors. So that's great to see, because now you're going to have more activity within those cells. So looking further at the satellite cells, this particular trial looks at several days, and I just wanted to pull a few for sake of time. But on day 14, we could see that the Myo5 satellite cell density had a tendency to be higher than the D3 alone. Pretty large jump in number there. If we look at the Pac7 satellite cells, so again involved in differentiation and protein synthesis, we saw a significant improvement with 25-hydroxy-D3 treatments. It also led to greater density in a larger muscle fiber area of the pectoralis major. Looking at the nuclear density and the muscle fiber cross-sectional, we can see a significant improvement with 25-hydroxy versus feeding dietary D3 alone. So a few other factors involved in protein synthesis would be our IGF-1 and looking at our protein synthesis rate specifically. And here in this trial, we had control level of D3, which was around 2,700 IUs of D3. We had our high level of D, which was doubling that at 5,500 IUs. So again, you can see what we kind of talked about earlier. Just because we doubled the vitamin D3 did not mean we're seeing double the effect or even the same as a 25-hydroxy. So our 25-hydroxy-D3 added throughout the entire 42 days had the largest impact on IGF-1 expression, which is directly involved in protein synthesis. And then if we looked at protein synthesis at that fractional synthesis rate, we can see that significant increase in 25-hydroxy diet. A couple other indicators that we looked at in this trial were mTOR and S6K1. mTOR is a protein kinase. It regulates all kinds of things in the cell involved with growth, proliferation, motility, survival, protein synthesis, and transcription of some of those factors that I mentioned earlier. So we were able to see that 25-hydroxy-D3 significantly improved the mTOR gene expression. So able to, again, help another factor helping with protein synthesis rate in those 25-hydroxy-D3 treatments, as well as the S6K1 gene expression. Another one of those gene markers involved in protein synthesis. So we're seeing it throughout these transcription factors. And in this trial, to show the breast meat yield improvement and how it relates to a practical sense, we look at all these cellular level. At a practical level, we saw an significant increase in breast meat yield improvement. May not seem like a lot from 19.7 to 20.4, but when we're looking at breast meat yield and talking about percentage, and when producers are paid on that, that is a pretty significant increase. And so we've looked at this breast meat yield percent improvement over several field trials, research trials, both small and large, and then some industry data that we've gathered as well. And overall, between all of these trials, to date. We have a few more to add here, but there's some breast meat yield improvement of 0.75% on average in the US. If we look across the globe to see, what's happening globally in the EU and North America, we can see an average improvement of about 1% in breast meat yield. And we continue to collect this data to see what we're seeing. And it's a range anywhere between 0.3%, upwards of almost 4% that we've seen in a couple of trials. And so to break down some of the US industry data, just to show one of the pieces that we've peeled out. In 2018, we collected this on small birds looking at 3.6 to about 4.4 pounds. Again, just selected the small birds for sake of time. And if we look at no 25-hydroxy-D3 and we look at 25-hydroxy-D3 fed in the starter only and 25-hydroxy-D3 fed beyond the starter, so this could mean starter grower or starter grower finisher, and we can look at the differences here. We see a WOG yield of an improvement of 0.7% or 1.1%. If we look at breast meat yield improvement, we can see that 0.6% or even up to 1% if 25-hydroxy was fed throughout the life cycle of that bird. So in the industry data, we're seeing this as well as our research setting. So overall, 25-hydroxy-D3 is improving that breast meat yield by stimulating muscle development through the satellite cells, those myogenic factors, and increasing that protein synthesis rate, leading to more muscle and therefore that higher meat yield. With that, I can take any questions. Thank you.
Great job, Shelby. Really nice presentation and great data. It tells a good story on how you've got the molecular mechanisms all the way through very applied field trials data that you've collected from the field. I know there's been some work on this. How about meat quality? Obviously, you're getting improvements in breast meat yield. Do you see any changes in meat quality one way or the other?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we do have some of that information. For sake of time, I wasn't able to include much of it, but I can say that we've run a few trials to see the protein content and how that's increased. And we've been able to pick that up in 3 different trials, one of those being a customer trial. So there are some differences even in content of that breast meat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. And certainly it makes sense. I mean, you touched on the fact that from the enteric infections, I've seen in work that we've done here, any minor damage, particularly due to Eimeria to the intestine, lipid digestibility and utilization is disproportionately impacted compared with the other nutrients. So, and there's, been literature to show that has a direct impact on vitamin D and obviously and subsequent effects that we'd see there. So yeah, I think that's a very strong case.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And early on in those birds, it's really beneficial that we have the ability to feed 25-hydroxy-D3 and not rely on vitamin D3 for those reasons, because the birds are stressed. It's harder to get that to their blood. So
sure. You talked a lot about broilers and how that translates in breast meat yield. What about in layers? What type of recent updates on 25-hydroxy-D3 in layers do you have?
Sure. Yeah, 25-hydroxy typically in layers was really fed in the laying period. And we've got some recent studies to show the great importance of it in the pullet phase. And so it's really about setting that bird up. And we really focus on the bone health of those layers to be able to set them up for productive life cycle. And we found that when it's fed in the pullets, they had that stronger cortical bone, stronger medullary bone, and it translated directly in that egg quality. So we've got some updated research on layers too.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And to that end, so broilers, layers, and then obviously, classically we think about this being very important for breeders. I mean, do you prioritize it more for broilers or breeders, or what are your thoughts there?
Sure. Honestly, I would say both. And I say that because I wasn't able to share it today, but we've got the research in the breeders to show how impactful that can be for the progeny. Mm-hmm. So on muscle yield, on immune health as well, with that 25-hydroxy being in the breeders, how important it is for that translation into the egg and into the progeny of the chick. So we can improve that muscle yield starting from that breeder level. And for the breeders directly, the immune health that 25-hydroxy can have to keep those breeders healthy is obviously very important, and it can have an impact there as well. So both broilers and breeders for muscle yield.
The advantages to feeding the 25-hydroxy, are those increased when the breeders are fed that? So are the chicks more responsive, or are they less dependent on it if it's established in the breeders?
Sure. I'm not sure if we have a good answer to that, but my hypothesis would be that they might be more responsive to it because we've seen that increase in those VDR receptors when 25-hydroxy D3 is fed. So if it's already present in those breeders, it's possible that the receptors in that broiler progeny might be at a higher level than they are if they weren't fed that in the breeders. Yeah,
that makes sense. Well, very good. Thanks again for I think we have one more question about, is it common for the birds to have these difficulties? Yeah, so it's not common after that 14 days. And it's just that the enzymes, because it's a fat soluble vitamin, so A, D, E, and K, all are going to have to be absorbed using lipase bile acids to form those micelles. So if they can't, they're not as efficient as doing that. It's not that they're having a difficulty. It's just that there's a bit of an insufficiency for those first 14 days. And so that's one of the benefits of feeding a 25-hydroxy is you can bypass the insufficiencies those first couple weeks of a broiler's life. Yeah, very good. Makes sense. Well, thanks again. Great presentation. We really appreciate the information. A lot of good comments. And so I know that the audience appreciate it. So thanks again, Shelby. Thank you all. Thanks, Sam. All right. So we'll now have a 10-minute break. Take this opportunity to stretch your legs, grab a cup of coffee, and we'll be back. But before we go, I'd like to again thank our sponsors at Aseo, Cargill, and DSM Firmenich for this program. And we'll see you in a few minutes for our next presentation. Thank you. Most days I can barely leave my bed. Someone lives rent-free inside my head. I say I'm not okay, I'm terrified. When I go to sleep, when I close my eyes, what the hell am I supposed to do? Oh my God, I can't breathe, and I don't know why. Angels come and they leave to the midnight sky. You only know how much you meant. You only know the time we spent. Take the pain from my heart and make it whole again. Can you give me some relief? I've been out here hiding like a thief. I'll pull the windows down when I feel low. Keep my demons close so nobody knows. The crusade that lives inside of me. Oh my God, I can't breathe, and they don't. To the midnight sky, you only know how much you meant. You only know the time we spent. Take the pain from my heart and make it whole again. Just
to make it whole again. I don't know what you want. Let's have a bit of fun till I downfall. My love, if you feel like I do right now, don't say you're on the run to the other side, my love. Let's have a bit of fun till I downfall. My love, if you feel like I do right now, don't say you're on the run to the other side, my love. You say you wanna try, but you never do. Sugar, there's a reason why we lose. The only thing I can see is my own silhouette. I'm getting stronger, step by step. The clock is ticking, but there's no time for regrets. I've been flying from town to town, from London to Taiwan. I've been all around the globe, trying to protect your soul. We are heroes tonight. We will fly above the sky. We are heroes tonight. Yeah. We are heroes tonight. We will fly above the sky. We are heroes tonight. Yeah. Now town to town, from London to Taiwan. I've been all around the globe trying to protect your soul.
Most days I can barely leave my bed. Someone lives rent free inside my head. I say I'm not okay, I'm terrified when I go to sleep, when I close my eyes. What the hell am I supposed to do? Oh my God, I can't breathe, and I don't know why. Angels come and they leave to the midnight sky. You only know how much you meant. You only know the time we spent. Take the pain from my heart and make it whole again. Can you give me some relief? I've been out here hiding like a thief. I'll pull the windows down when I feel low. Keep my demons close so nobody knows. The crusade that lives inside of me. Oh my God, I can't breathe, and I don't know why. Angels come and they leave to the midnight sky. You only know how much you meant. You only know the time we spent. Take the pain from my heart and make it whole again. Galaxies, nightmares, I don't think they fight fair. Why am I so sad all the time? I don't wanna take my drugs, I just wanna be okay. Will I ever feel again? Galaxies, nightmares, I don't think they fight fair. Why am I so sad all the time? I don't wanna take my drugs, I just wanna be okay. Will I ever feel again? Oh my God, I can't breathe. Angels come and they leave. You only know how much you meant. You only know the time we spent. Take the pain from my heart and make it whole again.
Hello again, and welcome back, everyone. If you're just joining us for the afternoon, I'm Sam Rochel, Associate Professor at Auburn University, and I'm hosting this event this afternoon. If you were with us in the earlier session, I hope you enjoyed your break and had a chance to recharge, because it's time to get started again. And so let's continue with our presentations for the rest of the afternoon. Just remember that if you have some questions, you can put those in the chat, and then we'll address those with each speaker at the end of each session. And to that end, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Vivek Kudapan from Cargill, to discuss innovations in poultry nutrition and health to optimize production. Welcome, Dr. Vivek.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, very good. Just wanted to confirm. First of all, really appreciate this opportunity to participate in this Poultry Feed Additive Summit, and super excited to share with you some of our recent innovations and outcomes in poultry nutrition and health to optimize production performance. So the first question here is, why do we want to innovate, or what is going to drive the innovation in this space? It mainly depends on what the market needs and also how we want to achieve that target. If you look at the global poultry meat consumption for the next decade, you can see that it is going to increase from 135 million metric tons to a 156 million metric ton over the next 10 years. And this is almost a 15% increase in global meat consumption. Also, if you look at the total meat produced over this period of time, it is going to increase by 41 million metric tons. And this includes meat from all species like beef, swine, poultry, and also sheep meat. Now, within this total meat production over the decade, if you look at the percentage of contribution by different species, poultry is going to contribute 48% of this additional meat produced over the period of time. So clearly, poultry is going to drive the global meat production over this time. And if you look at the statistics for egg production and consumption, you will see similar trends there also. So overall, what this suggests is that poultry production is going to help in providing food security, which is the physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food for this growing global population. Now, there are challenges in meeting this global food security as well. If you look at the different categories of challenges, there'll be environmental concerns, which are related to carbon footprint and environmental pollution, and also the appropriate management of various resources like land and water for animal production. Economic viability is also really important from a producer perspective, finding that perfect balance between the production cost and increasing demand for the supplies, for the products, which again determines the profitability for the producers. Now, going to the social concerns, which is going to be mainly driven by consumer perspective, what the consumer needs from a quality standpoint, and also the naturalness of the product with respect to removal of antibiotics from the feed and all those things. And then abiding with animal welfare and regulatory specifications. So there is a greater opportunity and responsibility for the poultry industry to provide food security to the world, but it has to be done in a more sustainable way to be more successful in future. Now, this is where Cargill mainly focus on. In Cargill, with more than 155,000 employees working in 70 different countries and more than 155 years of experience, Cargill is a trusted partner for food, agriculture, financial, and industrial customers in more than 125 countries. And our purpose is mainly to nourish the world in a more safe, responsible, and sustainable way. This actually forms the core or the basis for all the innovation efforts we are working on. So in my coming slides, I'm going to share with you some of our experiences in innovating different products and also technologies in poultry, nutrition, and health space. We all know that gut microbiome has a critical role to play, or a crucial role to play in case of poultry health and production. Gut microbiome is directly linked to the proper digestion and absorption of nutrients. But even going beyond, a lot of studies have shown that gut microbiome has a link to various visceral or vital organs through organ-gut axis, which influences the normal functioning of those organs. So it's really important to understand what is going on at the gut level. But that is always a challenge, because if you have seen data coming out of gut microbiome analysis, it's so complex. It's very difficult to condense it down to something which is easy to understand and can be implemented at the farm level. And that is where Cargill developed this advanced microbiome surveillance tool called Galleon. So with Galleon, what happens is that over the years, we collected samples from birds across different trials, conducted in different world areas under different dietary conditions and also different environment and management conditions. And we built a database of gut microbiome. And today, when we get a new sample from a customer or a trial, we analyze those samples, and that data will be compared with this database, this already built database, through a machine learning algorithm. So this algorithm will make the comparison, and based on that, it will give you predictions about your particular microbiome sample. It will also help you to categorize them into good performing or the bad performing birds. And also it can give you key biomarkers which are linked to various production performances or parameters like body weight, feed conversion, or even pre-harvest food safety aspects. Based on this analysis, Galleon will provide clear microbiome related insights, which will give you some actionable items which can be implemented at the farm level to improve the gut microbiome, thereby optimizing the animal health and performance. It will also help in reducing the feed cost and ensure profitability to the producers. Now, the really cool thing about Galleon is that sample collection is non-invasive, meaning we don't need to kill birds to collect samples. You can just take cloacal swabs, put it in a tube, and send it to us. We will do the analysis and provide you with a complete report, which again, our Galleon technical experts can walk you through the report and provide you instructions what change needs to be done at the farm level. Again, it's also important to mention that Galleon is not linked to any specific products or solutions. So you can use Galleon to evaluate the gut microbiome at the farm level and evaluate the performance with respect to body weight, feed conversion. You can also look at your managemental aspects like vaccine program, your ventilation, even looking at some pathogen risk which might be occurring in your flock. And also, you can see how the changes in the feed ingredients or the sourcing is affecting the gut microbiome and what's happening with the health and performance of those animals. Now, there are different ways we can use Galleon to evaluate the farm health. One way to do this is you can do a comparison between health and the high-performing flock and the low-performing flock. If you look at the slide here, the left side is showing a high-performing flock which had better body weight and feed conversion ratio, and it is compared with a low-performing flock which is under the same conditions but in different houses. Now, one thing you can clearly see here is there is differences in the way microbiome progresses over time. If you focus on the high-performing flock, looking at the relative abundance of different microbiome groups, you can see at an early time point, the birds have more of a lactate-producing bacteria in the gut, and over a period of time, the abundance of lactate-producing bacteria goes down. And this is getting replaced by another group of bacteria, which is short-chain fatty acid producers. So what happens here is lactic acid produced by this lactate-producing bacteria is used as a nutrient or a fuel by this short-chain producing bacteria, and they grow in abundance. Once they grow, they start producing various short-chain fatty acids such as propionic acid or butyric acid, which they have more benefit in gut integrity and improving the gut health. One thing also important to mention is that opportunistic pathogens were high during the early time point, but later they went down in abundance and they're kept in a lower level in high-performing flock. Now, if you come to the low-performing flock, the level of opportunistic pathogens were pretty consistent and high throughout the grow-out time. And you see some similar trend in the lactic acid producers and short-chain fatty acid producers, but their levels were overall very low in low-performing flocks compared to high-performing flocks. So overall, what this data is suggesting is that in case of broiler birds, there is a gut microbiome maturation process going on as they grow older. So they start with a high abundant lactate producing population, and then over a period of time, they switch to a more mature and resilient microbiome where there's primarily short-chain fatty acid producing bacteria are there. So this way, Galleon helps us to understand what is going on with the microbiome. Now, based on this information, we need to look at what are the intervention strategies we need to use to improve the gut health of the birds. One area at Cargill we are working on is using different feed additives to improve gut health in birds. This slide is showing a list of some of the feed additives used in the industry. Now, this is not a comprehensive list of all the feed additives, nor it is showing all the modes of action of different feed additives. But I just want to give you some idea about the modes of action proposed for some of these additives. One thing you can see here is that each feed additive, they have their own specific modes of action. For example, phytogenics, they are more effective in improving the digestive function in animals, while something like a postbiotic is more effective in improving the gut microbiome or shifting it to a favorable population, and also improving the immunity of the birds. At Cargill, we have the opportunity to work with a wide range of feed additive portfolio coming from Diamond V, Delacone, and also Provimi. So the more we know about these feed additives, the more we realize that one feed additive or one type of feed additive cannot solve all the challenges in the industry. We need to look at this modes of action and find out the gaps between their modes of action and come up with synergistic combinations which can compensate their gaps each other and then provide us with a better magnitude and consistency of benefits. And this is one of the areas where we have been focusing a lot on, and we have some really successful outcomes from this kind of synergistic combinations of feed additives. Now, the first outcome from this synergistic combination innovation is a product called Dive MB Pro. This is a combination of postbiotics and essential oil compounds. Now, those who are not familiar with the term postbiotics, those are the preparation of inanimate microorganisms and or their components that can confer health benefit to the host. Now, putting in simple words, these are products coming out of a controlled fermentation process. But one thing to remember there is no live microorganism in it. Those are inactivated before these products are being fed to animals. So the idea behind combining essential oil compounds and postbiotics in this product is that essential oil compounds can act in the upper part of the GI tract where they can improve the activity of digestive enzymes. And then postbiotics can act in the lower part of the GI tract where they can modulate the gut microbiome and shift it to a more beneficial side. So combining these two will give both benefit in the animals. This is a relatively new product, but we have conducted a number of trials, both in the university settings and also under field conditions to evaluate the benefit of this product in broiler birds. If you look at the graphs given here, those are coming out of meta-analysis done from different trials across different world areas even, comparing a control group which was given a basal diet with birds fed with MB Pro in their diets. So you can see that at 35 days and also at 42 days, MB Pro for birds had significantly better feed conversion, body weight in going up to even 2.9% in 42 days. And they also had significantly better feed conversion ratio at 35 and 42 days, even going up to around close to 4 points improvement in feed conversion rate at 42 days. Now, we also did some Gallium analysis with some of these trials. We collected samples from 4 different research trials and did a meta-analysis with that using Gallium. The picture shown here is a principal component analysis came out of Gallium. Each arrow is a vector which is representing a treatment at a particular time point. So for example, NC here is the negative control or the control at 21 day. And then we had MB Pro also samples evaluated at 21 day. And then we had this control and MB Pro at 35 days. One thing to remember here is that the closer the vectors are in this plot, meaning there is more similarity in their microbiome. For example, if you look at the 35 days, control and MB Pro were really close, meaning they had similar microbiome profile. But if you look at 21 days, there was a big difference in the microbiome profile for the control and MB Pro. Now, the very interesting part here is that MB Pro birds, even at a 21 day of age, they had a microbiome which was pretty close to a more developed microbiome at 35 days. Now, if you go a little bit deeper into this microbiome profile and different bacterial populations within those profile, there are two main differences you see with the MB Pro in the diet. One is it can promote good bacteria. So mainly, if you look at the volcanic plot, the main bacterial population which was promoted by MB Pro was Lactobacillus. And this is a group of bacteria which is mainly involved in butyric acid production. So if you remember the characteristic of a mature gut microbiome, it reaches more maturity when there is more butyric acid producers there. And in addition to that, Lactobacillus, we also saw some beneficial bacterial population increasing, like the Parabacteroides and the Nocardiopsis bacteria. Now, moving on to the other side, another benefit we see with the MB Pro in the diet is that it can help in managing some of the undesirable bacteria, such as Clostridium perfringens, which is a well-known pathogen in poultry. It also helped in reducing Lactobacillus 5. So if you remember the previous speaker talked about this, not all Lactobacillus are the same, are not good. There are some Lactobacillus which are associated with lower body weights, and Lactobacillus 5 is one of those bad bacteria. So MB Pro was able to reduce the abundance of that bad Lactobacillus population. It also reduced Listeria population, which is mainly a proteolytic bacteria. So this again implies that MB Pro is improving the protein digestibility in the upper part of the GI tract, and maybe that is why there is less food coming to the hind part for the Listeria to grow and flourish. So overall, what this tells us is that, yes, birds need better maturation of gut microbiome to have better performance. And products like MB Pro, which can help in improving that or accelerating the gut microbiome maturation, can help in improving performance in those broader birds. Now, moving on to layers, looking at a study we conducted comparing control with XPC. XPC is another postbiotic, which is a yeast-based fermentation product. And for this trial, we started with pullets at day 0, and we started the product from day 0 all the way up to 89 weeks of age. Production performance in these layers were evaluated during that 16 week to 89 weeks. Now, the table given below is showing the results, the performance results coming out of this trial. And you can see that XPC birds had a significantly higher hen house production compared to controls. XPC birds consumed more feed, and also they had numerically better livability. You can also see that the percentage of checked eggs or eggs with a poor eggshell quality was significantly lower for XPC birds compared to control birds. Now, this data, this result is not new, because we have seen this in a number of our trials, and this has come somewhat consistently seen in various layer productions with XPC. But the reason I wanted to show you this trial data is that from this same trial, we also collected samples to evaluate gut microbiome using gallium. Now, similar to the previous data we discussed, this is a principal component analysis showing those vectors related to each treatment at each time point. And remember, cross of the vectors are, the more similar their microbiome are. If you look at this graph here, you can see we collected samples from control and XPC birds starting from 17 weeks of age when they started producing. And then at different time points, we collected samples all the way up to 89 weeks of age, which was the end of the trial. Now, the important point to mention here is that XPC birds, even from 35 weeks of age, they had a microbiome which was pretty similar to a more developed microbiome at 89 weeks. The control birds, they took longer time to reach that particular developed gut microbiome level. To put it in a very simple perspective, if you look at the animation here, XPC and the control birds, they started and the similar gut microbiome profile at 17 weeks of age, and then they reached similar microbiome profile at 89 weeks of age. But the difference is rate at which the microbiome was developing. Now, the red line over here is showing XPC birds, and you can see that XPC birds reached that more developed gut microbiome profile at a faster rate than the control birds. And in the same trial, you can see how that accelerated development of gut microbiome is linked to various production performance benefits. Now, these layers, they have much more complex life cycle than broilers. So right now we are trying to understand what does this really mean, and what are the populations of bacteria driving this development of gut microbiome in layers. But overall, what this data suggests is that using a galleon, we can understand what are the challenges affecting the gut microbiome, and also galleon can be used to understand the mode of action of various feed additives. And combining galleon and these feed additives, we can make specific recommendations on when to use which type of product to get a better magnitude and consistency of benefits, thereby improving the return of investment for the producers. Moving on to another synergistic combination we are working on currently, and this is for layers. It's a combination of postbiotic with phytogenic compounds. The main intention or the objective for this combination is to support layer health and performance in various challenging environments. Now, if you look at the layer production, one of the main challenges for layer producers is E. coli infections. Avian pathogenic E. coli, they can cause high mortality and economic burden to layer producers. So this product we evaluated in one animal trial using birds which were challenged with avian pathogenic E. coli. If you look at the graph here, this is showing the mean lesions came out of that trial after challenge. So the birds were challenged at 28 days, and the lesions were measured at 35 days, so 1 week after the challenge. We had 5 different treatments in the trial. There was a negative control, a challenge control, and PT plus is vaccine, and the combination of PT plus with vaccine. And you can see PT plus was significantly lowering the lesions associated with the challenge, and even the severity score was lowered by PT plus. So what it tells us is that PT plus can help in mitigating some of these challenges from avian pathogenic E. coli, thereby improving performance in birds. Another innovation we have in layers is a non-invasive tool called Reveal Layers. This is an NAR-based tool which will help in measuring the body fat composition in layers. And we know that the layered body fat composition is directly linked to the production performance. So by measuring this non-invasively can help in understanding what is happening with the fat composition, and then use various nutritional interventions to optimize that fat composition, thereby improving production performance in layers. So to conclude, what we saw today is that there is greater opportunity for poultry industry to feed the growing global population, but we have to do it more sustainably. And in order to achieve that goal, we have to use science-based innovation with effective products, like looking at the synergy between the feed additives, and also combining it with a holistic approach using advanced technologies like Galleon and Reveal to optimize poultry production. With that, thank you so much for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Great presentation, Vivek. Really interesting information. And this is where, even though I get to do research here at the university every day, I get jealous because of Cargill's reach and the ability to collect samples from all these different scenarios to really be able to build the type of robust, database it takes a company with that scope or an organization with that scope to be able to build something like what you're doing there. So very interesting approach.
Thank you.
I mean, to that end, I think one challenge we have on the poultry side versus, say, other animals where we can more easily identify individual animals, whereas we're trying to look at flocks or houses, essentially. Do you see that being a limitation when we're trying to collect? I mean, it can be high throughput, but at the end of the day, we still have to get the sample, whether that's from the fat or the microbiome from the individual bird. And how are you seeing that track across the population when you're taking those samples from individuals within the flock?
That's a great question. And definitely there is variation, as you mentioned. The diet, there may be variations with the world areas. There may be
Yeah.
variations with the strain and all. That's why we want to build a robust database, because the more samples we collect, the more we are able to remove those variations and noises and get to the real point. That is what we are using with Galleon, right? So the database we have is growing day by day. There is more and more samples added to that database, which will help us to remove those variations and look at what is actually happening in the gut microbiome. So that is how we try to compensate for that individual variations and get the more robust data out of it.
And that makes sense. And, to that end, I mean, as far as when you're looking at layers or another flock and you see this, what are the consequences of not treating those?
Say that again, sorry.
The question we had, what are the consequences, practical consequences of not treating those, undesirable bacteria when you do check those changes?
So there are a lot of examples we can share. One of the issues, one of our trial, the farm trial had was that one of the customers, they had birds eating more, but their production was similar, right? So they wanted to see what is happening there. And then we went there and looked at the Galleon profile and saw that there is some guttural challenge, like some undesirable bacteria population in those high eating birds having. So based on that, looking at the different populations there, we designed some intervention strategies which can help in accelerating this maturation and also reducing those undesirable bacteria. So with that approach, we were able to improve their feed conversion ratio. The feed intake was reduced, but at the same time, the production performance was maintained. So there are a lot of examples like that. And if you don't treat those undesirable bacteria, that is going to reduce your efficiency, and you're going to lose more feed. That will reduce your profitability from the production.
Yeah, very good. And I mean, I think obviously layers, there's a lot of opportunity. You have a bit more time, and obviously each flock is more, financially consequential too to make these changes than. So I think it's a really neat application to be able to make those real-time changes. So
Sure.
A very exciting approach.
Thank you.
Well, great. Well, thank you again, and we really appreciate your presentation. And with that, we'll move on, last but not least, to our next speaker, who is also one of our co-hosts for the Poultry Nutrition Black Belt podcast, another product brought to you by Wisenetics. But our next guest is Dr. Pratima Adhikari from Mississippi State University, who is also an expert in layer nutrition, and she's going to be discussing today about phytases and proteases in laying in feeding. Welcome, Dr. Pratima.
Thank you, Sam. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you all. Thanks for joining this live event today, and thanks Wisenetics Poultry Podcast for providing this opportunity. I am Pratima Adhikari, as Sam said, working in Mississippi State University, and today I'm going to share some of the literature reviews as well as some of my lab, what we've been working here, of kind of summarizing some study and where to go forward with this kind of research, especially in laying hens. I would like to start with some protease and some background studies that have been done a couple of years ago, and what's now, and what we can do more, and what is there to look into is this enzyme. As we all know that undigested protein may be fermented in the cecum and have a very detrimental effect on the animal, or even contribute to nitrogen pollution through excretion. So all of these pulls and brings into something to think about how we can optimize the protein digestion. Because we need to see if we can save some cost in feed, and also for the various environment and health reasons, such as lower nitrogen excretion. Typically, few indigenous proteases are released within the animals, especially poultry, but they are very minimal digestion. They may help to use the feed protein in these chickens, but however, a large amount of proteins and amino acids are traveled through the GIT without being even thoroughly digested. And we need, that's where we need this exogenous protease to add for this digestion so that they can be converted into smaller peptides and then eventually amino acids. The use of phytases and carbohydrates or NSPases in monogastric feed is very widespread together with the protease. Also, it would be very uncommon for protease to be supplemented without this, at least one of the other enzymes. Now we're gonna tease out a little bit more on a monocomponent protease and also as a cocktail, as I will be talking more in just a few papers here. It could be either monocomponent or as a cocktail with other even NSPases or lipases. So this, I really like this paper. It has done a very thorough analysis, as a meta-analysis using a lot of a monocomponent type of protease with Sarah Lee et al. 2018. Here you can see a protease numbered with different numbers. It goes all the way from 1 to 44. So they have done a lot of as much as 44 proteases. And this data was collected from about 67 experimental animal trials. Here you can see how this protease inclusion is very much varying, all the way from your 150 milligram per kilogram to under 20,000. So you can see a lot of variations even in the throughout this study. And this paper has done a very nice job. And one of the conclusions from this paper was that, and I'm going to show that later in my slide, as the inherent digestibility is increased, the effect of protease and this amino acid digestibility decrease. So let's keep this in mind, and then we can come back later on. So again, going to that one of the table I pulled out from their study, what they saw, pretty much they did all these meta-analysis from a poultry and swine, but here we're focusing on a poultry. Here you can see that, especially with the feed intake, there was a very mean response of protease was very marginally positive, as much as 0.49% for in case of poultry. And especially, again, with these poultry, the other parameters would be your body weight gain and feed conversion ratio, where they saw this value as an increase in body weight gain as of 1.38 and a reduction as much as by 0.9. So which is pretty good mean value they have reported here. And again, now I'm going to go a little bit more on a monocomponent and a cocktail type and how in this individual study what they have seen. Now, just letting you know a little bit of information or background here, what I'm going to talk about is there's a lot of variation in the data that papers have published, it's shown in protease. That's why we always constantly, there's always questions about enzyme. Okay, this works here in my farm or in my study research, and then it doesn't work, or maybe it works minimum. So it's obvious because at the end of the day, it goes with your type of ingredient you use, and you should not be forgetting that. And of course, and we're talking about a layer bird, and these are a mature, a long life bird. So you can think about all the way from your starter, grower, developer phase to all the way to late lay. So that these are the things needs to be thought and taken care before applying any kind of protease, no matter what you have a monocomponent or a cocktail. Now, both of this study by Alder-Bridge et al. 2020 and Cousin et al. 2020, they use this either monocomponent and also cocktail. Both of these found a great, impressive, apparent allele digestibility of almost all amino acid at this end of the grower phase. The take on from this is that, again, monocomponent concept was kind of built on the concept that it involves assigning a real matrix value of these amino acids. That's why we kind of by the name we say it's monocomponent, because we could be just focusing only on this protease and can bring on those matrix values. They should be more defined in this case. Again, as we know, we're talking a little bit on the layer side. I would like to focus here. These are 4 papers that I've reviewed, and I found this comparing, I found very fascinating, just make my own Excel sheet here and compare these side by side. Here, The first two, you can see these are the study with the Vieiro et al. And Barbosa et al. They use a monocomponent, and then the second two use as a cocktail of protease. Different breeds are here. You have Isa Brown to Highland Brown. So particularly looking into the paper by Barbosa et al., where they use now monocomponent protease, it helped to increase the egg production. So as you can see, this bar with the addition and non-addition of protease, a different color. Going to paper by Elhack et al. 2017, they found, again, remember this is a cocktail, right? They are coming with the NSPase enzyme. Adding this protease lowered the production significantly. So now again, from this 4 paper itself here, you can see there are some variations. Now going more digging into more in a quality side of it, when you look into my middle part of this graph, we have this Elhack et al. 2017, which I want to focus here. Again, high eggshell percentage and highest albumin percentage was observed in a protease added diet here. And whereas highest yolk was seen in the diet without protease. So you can see these lot of variations in this egg quality as well. Now, digging more into a monocomponent and pulling that paper out where I showed in the previous slide the comparisons, I have pulled one paper out, and I'm going to just show and focus this more. In this study by Barbosa et al., they use a monocomponent protease. These were also types were different. So we had A protease and B protease, where they had Bacillus licheniformis best, and other was Streptomyces brady. So when you look into this ingredient profile, there were corn, soy, meat and bone meal, and soybean hull. Then going into what was offered in their amino acids is lysine, methionine, threonine, and tryptophan, and also was provided matrix. Now, when you go back to the concept that I was trying to put is monocomponent providing a matrix, I think this study did a good job reporting all these things, values. And again, as you know, most of this layer, with almost all the diets, we have to have some standard phytase. Now we're gonna tie in the phytase talk later on in my second half of the slide. So here we should not forget that diet will also have phytase. So in this study, they use the standard dose of phytase, and what they want the take on was neither protease affected egg quality, so there was not difference either type of the protease. Going to a cocktail type, again, the paper that I pulled out here is what I already showed in my bar diagram. They use NSPase with the cocktail with the NSPase, and then you have 0 to 250 milligram per kilogram of protease used. So here, when you see that the matrix was not offered, and these were a different breed of hen, and this was pretty much as a breed just ready to lay, 22 weeks perfect. What they saw was it was a good improved FCR as well as egg quality, and also they found that up to 500 kilogram by replacing this with the DDGS could help in lowering the blood ammonia. So, and then looking at the profile of the ingredient, they have corn, soybean meal, DDGS, and corn gluten meal, but the amino acid they offered was lysine and methionine and did not go below that. So, as an example of my own lab, I want to focus this paper because this is one of the first paper, and I think only one paper we work on a protease as a monocomponent. I want to review this a little bit where, again, this was a monocomponent protease. We used a protease as 60 gram per metric ton, and we found the recovery rate as close to 98%, so nothing doubt and that recovery percentage we got. Also, just as information, we use this protease, which was based on Bacillus licheniformis. Of course, we use our phytase in our diet, and we credit it for calcium and phosphorus. Looking into the crude protein level here, as you can see, there are 2 phases of diet, layer 1 and layer 2. 100% is your recommendation from your guideline, then we went all the way up to 85%. So when I say 85%, our crude protein level was reduced. Amino acid density was also reduced by reducing the lysine. But as you can imagine, we maintain the ratio because the ratio to other amino acids to lysine were kept constant in our study. So going into the result here, I have taken this from one of my student presentation we did in last year before PSA. So the main important thing here to look at, is that when we went to 85% lower from the recommendation, the protease did not help. Overall, there was a significant decrease in the egg production. So that's something we learned. We may have made our amino acid density way low. So this is something to think about for our future learning. And again, going to the egg mass, what we saw was a lower egg mass was associated with our 90 and 85% of the density of amino acid level we use in our study, whereas our highest egg mass was about that 95 range. So I would say definitely with protease, nothing different. But as you can see, when we were moving from 95 overall, the egg mass is getting lower. And you're talking about here a good age of layer, 30 to 50 weeks of age. So we definitely think this is a kind of red flag. So maybe between 95 and 90 would be the things to choose. Not 100%, because even though there's not significant difference, we may want to save some cost there, not formulating or over formulating for these birds. We have a lot of data, but very interestingly, these coefficient of apparent ileal digestibility of valine I want to show here. Here, protease interacted with these I would say the protein and amino acid levels of density deficient diets, especially to increase this valine digestibility. When you look into this 95%, it was numerically higher. So I would say still there's some effect of a protease at a very gut level, a digestibility level of amino acid. Similar, it was we were very amazed to see a similar process was applied in a threonine digestibility as well, where you could focus on this area diet with protease at 95%, or even like rest of the lower protein diet, lower amino acid diets, they were always ahead, even numerically. So I would like to focus, this was interesting data. Something to think about at the digestibility of amino acid level. And we have all the other data which I'm not going to present. But here, just kind of looking into, kind of maybe summarizing what I was just talking about earlier. Where can this protease help? This graph or this table is a perfect example where you can see your synthetic amino acid could be digested, right? 100% almost. Then you have corn, soybean. Corn is a great it's a very good, no, it's not as much as soybean meal, but it's a very good source of protein here in the sense that it's very low of everything. So, but as you can see, almost over 90% is digested here. Most of these amino acids are digestible in corn and soybean meal compared to just look in the lower ingredient in the chart, like wheat bran, meat and bone meal, cottonseed meal, and feather meal. So it leaves us with a bunch of questions which industry is trying to find out. Would protease be more beneficial if the diet has animal protein, or low quality corn DDGS, or other less digestible protein sources such as canola meal, soybean, sunflower meal, than just the soybean meal? Because these varying nutrient profiles of ingredients can result in an inconsistent protease values. We have to remember when we apply this protease in this different ingredient background, then we have to make sure that they are releasing out of that poor protein sources. Increasing the inherent amino acid digestibility of a diet reduces the response to the protease. That's something that we can learn from these studies. Again, investigation into the effects of reducing dietary protein or amino acid on the environment sustainability could be explored more on this area. But again, as our data from the layer, we saw that we may not go lowering more than 85% of the recommendations. So here's something that just to consider. If we are trying to reduce our density, we may not reduce way too low, especially our amino acid densities, and they are very important. Going to some phytase updates here. Again, switching a gear a little bit, as where the focus of this webinar is just talk about two types of enzymes. A little bit of background on a phytase. As we know, in a cereal grain-based diets, about 50 to 85%, as high as 85% of phosphorus is known to be in phytate form. And these are very poorly utilized by poultry. This poor utilization of phytase phosphorus has been a concern in terms of environment and economic aspects as well, like feed cost and others. The addition of, as about 500 kg of phytases has proven to release or hydrolyze up to 35% of phytate phosphorus in any plant-based ingredient. Now, superdosing has been very common recently in the broiler and turkey. This has been applied in their industry pretty well. However, there are very much lack of research in the laying hen side and also a breeder side. Now, the objective of this presentation today is not to talk much about breeders, but I would like to focus on some laying hen study here, looking into this different level of the phytase. This study did a nice job of maybe trying to prove that, okay, the superdosing has a beyond phosphorus kind of effect, where they had this 3x4 factorial arrangement. They had 3 nutrient matrices of their diet where they had a control. Then they have a 5, which is your below 5%, and 10% of reduction on the levels of digestible amino acid. 4 levels of phytase they used were 0, 500, 1500, and 3000. So I really like this table and experiment how they have said their digestible methionine, total sulfur amino acid, lysine, and threonine were reduced in their amino acid density. So this is how we can look at, and this is a broiler paper where they have different phases from 1 to 21 days, and then different phase and different subsequent reduction in this 4 amino acid. So this is their background of their diet. So looking into the, like again, remember we're talking about beyond phosphorus, which is your amino acid digestibility in this case. When you look into this, what they learned was, yes, there was some extra phosphorus effect on amino acid digestibilities, particularly when you look into this highlighted portion. The digestibility was particularly higher in that 5% reduction diet, but they are also saying below 5% reduction, chances were lower digestibility. So we may not want to opt in into that option. So other study here, again, supporting from our what we found in laying hens. We did a study. We published this paper earlier this year. I would like to show what our background is on this paper on. We use this, we try to know more about in a corn soybean meal diet. Now you have to remember in our ingredient, there's nothing than a corn and soy. That was also the objective of the study, just to understand what we can bring in with the superdose. Then we also had another factor, limestone ratio, which have a 40 fine, 60 coarse as one level. The other would be your 15 fine and 85 coarse. So when we did this study, we were very precisely feeding these birds were formulated in according to the breeder or the management guide, and we made sure that in 100 grams, the birds were eating 100 grams per day and not a lot than that. Non-phytate phosphorus, we had, as you can see, these are our calcium and then calcium level in different phase, layer 2 and layer 3 phase feeding. But here in non-phytate phosphorus was 0.44 in case of PC and 0.27 in case of NC, which is our positive control and negative control. And we did not vary too much. We do now layer 2 and layer 3 because our main objective is to understand and not change a lot between these different confounding factors. So this is our background of the diet. We found that production dropped down at 1500 FTU for both ratios, regardless of your fine and coarse. But it was a little higher with the higher coarse particle of limestone at superdose phytase level. This was our learning. As you can see, 400 standard level was just fine, but when we look at the superdose, it was not doing great. I would like to bring it here, some of this data we collected with using Dr. Ulkim's lab at University of Georgia. We did some micro CT scan and we had a lot of data out of this, cortical, trabecular, and medullary bone. But here, the main effect I want to focus here is the trabecular bone mineral density. As you can see, at 400 standard phytase inclusion, and just, I know there are 2 factors in this graph. Please focus on the blue line, which is our 40 and 60. It was dipping down a little bit, although not significant different. But when you look into your 1500, it was just going up. That means it had a higher trabecular bone mineral density. That's very interesting. And in this moving diagram, as you can, I'm focusing here. What I mean is there, Yellow is our cortical bone, blue is our trabecular bone, and then the red is our medullary bone. So it was effective, showing some effect in a trabecular bone. So what we learned from this is that maybe more coarser, right? Remember that our coarsest was our 85, our more coarse lamestone ratio and superdose levels of phytase lower this trabecular bone mineral density at 60 weeks. So something to note, that may not be good. Now, another thing is also we collected the ileum digester, and we measured a lot of IPs all the way from here, IP6, and we measured this all the way to IP3 in gizzard and ileum. So regardless of your ratio, here what I would like to focus is our diets D, E, F, G, which is in the figure. We have all these diet with the phytase added, regardless of your 400 and 1500. They had the highest IP3 breakdown in the gizzard, which is interesting. And again, no any significant difference between your 400 and 1500. Going to the same IP3, which is inositol phosphate 3 breakdown in the ileum, we saw that diet F has the highest level of this breakdown, which is your 1500, but that with that ratio 40 and 60, 40 fine and 60 coarse. Now, going to summary and future directions, maybe some learning from the phytase here. More to explore on a superdose and protease feeding in layers. In laying hens, the decrease of hen day production, egg mass production, and the poor feed conversion ratios in most of the diets with 1500 FTU. Now, we need to pay attention to this calcium concentration because they play a lot of role. At this concentration been ranging in the literature, 3.5 to 4.2%. They has demonstrated that the dependence of this phytase superdosing on the calcium content. So we have to think about when we reduce and try to apply our phytase, we have to also make sure that our calcium is not under or over. So trying to understand and find a kind of niche in that range is very challenging, especially with these laying hens, which are very mature gut. Now the problem is even more complicated due to the high calcium requirement for egg shell formation, because laying hen all mobilize within themselves, pulling the calcium out of the bones when needed for the shell. So this has to be paid attention, and negative effects on the metabolic relationship of calcium and phosphorus ratio. So this is something we need to explore more on the future side. More to look on differentiated dietary concentration of calcium and phytase superdose effect on layers. So that's something I think we should work and find more answer on. Now, matrix contributions for the phytase being used must be accurate in as such that contribution does not exceed the phytate phosphorus available for release. So this is the very main learning that I found and in my experience, and I think that's where we should be very critical about applying and thinking about more about applying a superdose in the study and not just blaming superdose may not work. At least if we can try to check off this point, I think in the future is the way to go for phytase. At the end, I would like to thank for the opportunity, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take. Thank you.
Great job, Pratima. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think you covered a lot of very interesting things. Certainly, phytase has been around much longer than protease as far as commonly and widely used, but yet, as you demonstrated, we still have a lot to learn to appropriately use and predict the responses to each one. So given that, I mean, what do you think the future directions are that we need to explore in research involving protease and phytases?
Sure. I think in the future, as I mentioned, just think about what I mentioned about the protease, because it depends a lot in your ingredient profile. We have definitely seen that not just in a corn, soybean, but a lower digestible ingredient source, a protein that are digested like a very minimal digestion, maybe protease could be applied more. Sure, I think we need to try that. And again, okay, bird type and bird age comes then secondary factor. The second thing about phytase is that I think we need to focus on our non-phytate phosphorus level in our diet, and then trying to reduce that, trying to formulate in just looking into, in the literature, 0.21 to up to 0.30, like a level of non-phytate phosphorus is found. So this is great. I think industry were doing a great job, but I think even then again, think about the profile of the ingredient on top of that. We have corn and soy only, or we have other plant sources. I think these are the things just need to be, I think we can do more. And also, as I mentioned, on the calcium side, we have been doing good job on 3.5, 3.5 to 4.4, just being precise, but sometimes we have to understand that typically at what phase, for example, in the older layers, in case of layers, the metabolism is very slow. So they may be just pulling everything out of the bone, and because that's what you see a lot of diseases drooping down of the legs and the lameness and everything. So they will pull out their cortical bones, which is not good, because you want to make sure that they are utilizing from the diet. As they're more to explore on the non-phytate phosphorus and calcium side in the case of phytates.
Sure. No, I think those are all very important areas to look into. And I think you make really good points on the, around the protease, around specific to ingredients, but even, there's certain amino acids that are probably going to be released more. And so I think a lot of times if we see a case where a protease doesn't give us the response, at the end of the day, maybe the diet is such that it's just not designed that it's going to respond. I mean, we have to go back kind of to basic amino acid nutrition, because at the end of the day, what we're doing is releasing amino acids. And so we have to ensure those are going to be in a sensitive range and a benefit. So,
sure.
Yeah. Another question back to the phytase. Did you find any change in eggshell quality when you look at the limestone ratio in those experiments?
That's a very good question. We had a numerically higher values in our phytase with our 1500 phytase superdose and our 1585, which is our higher course. So that's why I think that's a kind of, when I say numerically higher, it may not tell a lot as a scientist. But then it's interesting. It did not drop down. It did not decrease, which is it maintained, I would say. It was a good eggshell. It's better eggshell. That's what we're kind of trying to navigate ourselves. Okay, production-wise, it dropped down, as you can see in my chart. But then there are some other things we need to understand. Okay, it's a lot of happening in our Giza or IP3, and then also this ilium IP3, and putting together the shell quality also not bad. So I don't know. So more to find, I guess.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Adhikari. I think that's all the time we have as we wrap up our event today. But thank you again for your great presentation. I know a lot of practical take-homes for the audience. And just to wrap up, thank you. And just to wrap up, I'd like to thank everyone again who attended and stayed with us to the end. It's been a pleasure to have you this afternoon. I think we've learned a lot about new questions and very new technologies, as well as, continued information on things that we've been thinking about for a long time as an industry. And so a lot of great information on a wide variety of topics. And I once again like to thank our sponsors who made this event possible, Additive, Cargill, and DSM Firmenich. And thank you and have a fantastic day. And I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.